Look closely at a family portrait from the late 19th century. The parents stand solemn and composed. A small child sits between them, hands folded neatly in her lap, gaze fixed toward the camera. Nothing appears unusual until you learn she had been dead for 3 days when this photograph was taken. Why would a family choose to pose beside the lifeless body of their child? What kind of world makes this decision feel not grotesque, but necessary? Welcome to Western Tales Official, where we examine the forgotten customs that shaped frontier life. Today we step inside dim Victorian parlors to confront one of the most misunderstood traditions: post-mortem photography. Before we begin, subscribe to Western Tales Official for deeply researched historical storytelling that uncovers the realities behind cultural myths. To understand this practice, we must first understand death in the 19th century. Mortality rates were dramatically higher than today. Childhood illness, infectious disease, childbirth complications, and frontier hardship meant that death was not distant or sanitized. It occurred in the home. Families washed the body themselves. They held vigils beside it. There were no specialized funeral homes in many Western settlements. The parlor served as both living space and temporary viewing chamber. Death was intimate, tactile, and unavoidable. Photography, meanwhile, was new and expensive. For many frontier families, a formal portrait was a rare luxury. Often, the only time a photographer was summoned to a remote homestead was after a death. The result was what became known as the last sleep portrait, a final image meant to preserve presence. In an era before video recordings or widespread portraiture, this photograph might be the only visual memory a family ever possessed of their loved one. The concept of memento mori, a Latin phrase meaning "remember you must die," was not fringe or gothic. It was embedded in daily life. Mourning jewelry contained braided hair from the deceased. Obituaries were read aloud. Black crepe hung from doorways. Post-mortem photography was not created to shock. It was created to memorialize. The camera became a tool of resistance against oblivion. Modern viewers often recoil at these images because we are culturally distanced from the physicality of death. Today, death is institutionalized. It occurs in hospitals and is handled by professionals behind closed doors. In contrast, Victorian families confronted mortality directly. The photograph did not represent morbidity, it represented continuity. It allowed families to maintain a tangible connection in a world where life expectancy was uncertain. As we move forward, we will examine how these images were created. The mechanics behind them reveal not only technical innovation, but a desperate determination to blur the boundary between life and death. Inside the photographer's studio, or more often, inside the family's own parlor, equipment was arranged with precision. Early photographic processes such as daguerreotypes required long exposure times. Subjects had to remain perfectly still for several seconds, sometimes longer. Ironically, this technical limitation made photographing the deceased more practical than photographing the living. The dead did not blink. They did not shift. But stillness alone was not enough. Photographers used posing stands, metal armatures designed to stabilize a seated subject. These devices, originally intended to help living clients maintain posture, were adapted to support lifeless bodies. Iron braces were positioned discreetly behind clothing. Hands were arranged carefully in laps or around cherished objects. If stiffness had already set in, limbs were manipulated into position with effort and care. Artistic techniques further enhanced the illusion of life. Photographers sometimes painted pupils onto closed eyelids directly on the negative or print. Rouge might be applied to cheeks to soften pallor. In some cases, the deceased was posed upright among siblings, indistinguishable at first glance from the living. The goal was not deception for spectacle, it was preservation of normalcy. Families wanted to remember their loved one as they had been, not as they appeared in death. The physical toll on photographers was significant. They worked in confined spaces with chemical processes involving mercury vapors and silver compounds. They handled fragile bodies during emotionally charged moments. Yet demand persisted. The photograph represented permanence in a transient world. Lighting was critical. Curtains were drawn to diffuse harsh sunlight. Reflective surfaces were positioned to illuminate facial features evenly. The final image often conveyed serenity rather than horror. Many subjects appear peacefully asleep, hands folded, expressions calm. This aesthetic choice reinforced the cultural framing of death as rest rather than annihilation. These mechanics of mimicry reveal a society grappling with mortality through technology. The camera became a bridge, part scientific instrument, part emotional anchor. In the next section, we examine how families participated in this process and what these compositions reveal about their psychology. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect for modern audiences is not the presence of the deceased alone, but the inclusion of living family members posed naturally beside them. Mothers cradle lifeless infants. Siblings stand shoulder to shoulder with a brother who will never move again. To contemporary eyes, the compositions feel staged beyond comfort. Yet within their cultural context, they represented unity and grief. One phenomenon known as the hidden mother involved a parent draped in fabric to steady a child during exposure. In some images, the shrouded figure is faintly visible behind the child, disguised as upholstery or curtain. In post-mortem cases, this technique sometimes ensured the body remained upright. The result is visually haunting, but historically practical. Why pose together? Because separation felt more unbearable than proximity. The photograph provided one final shared moment. In a time when burial might occur within days, this image extended the presence of the deceased beyond the grave. It was not uncommon for these portraits to be displayed prominently in the home, integrated into daily life rather than hidden away. Psychologically, this practice allowed families to assert agency in the face of loss. Instead of surrendering entirely to death, they curated its memory. The tactile act of dressing, positioning, and touching the deceased during photography reinforced connection. Grief was not outsourced. It was experienced fully and communally. Children, especially, were frequent subjects due to high mortality rates. For many parents, this portrait was the only record that their child had existed at all. Without it, memory relied solely on fragile recollection. The photograph became proof of life, of belonging, of love. As we move into the business side of this practice, we will see how technological advances expanded accessibility and transformed mourning into an industry. In the mid-19th century, daguerreotypes were costly and unique. As photographic technology evolved, formats like the carte de visite allowed multiple prints from a single negative. This innovation lowered cost and increased distribution. Families could mail copies to distant relatives, transforming private grief into shared remembrance. Studios advertised sensitivity and discretion. Mourning attire followed strict etiquette: black garments, veils, and symbolic jewelry. These images were often mounted in albums alongside portraits of the living, reinforcing continuity rather than separation. Photography democratized memorialization. What had once been reserved for the wealthy became attainable for working-class frontier families. The commercialization of mourning did not trivialize it, it standardized it. Templates emerged for composition. Backgrounds depicted pastoral serenity. Props, such as flowers, symbolized transience. The image served both emotional and social functions. Displaying a post-mortem portrait signaled respectability and adherence to mourning customs. Yet as photography became more casual and widespread, the need for deathbed portraits diminished. Families increasingly possessed images taken during life. The camera shifted from rare event documentation to everyday companion. This evolution paved the way for the decline of post-mortem photography. By the early 20th century, multiple forces converged to end the tradition. The rise of snapshot cameras meant most families already had living portraits. Advances in medicine gradually reduced mortality rates. Death migrated from home to hospital, distancing families from the physical process. Funeral homes professionalized body preparation, limiting intimate interaction. Today, these images circulate online, often stripped of context and labeled as grotesque curiosities. Ethical debates surround their collection and display. Are they historical artifacts deserving preservation, or private moments that should remain undisturbed? The answer depends on perspective, but one truth remains. These portraits were acts of love, not spectacle. Victorian post-mortem photography reveals a frontier society determined to outlast death through tangible memory. It forces us to confront our own discomfort with mortality. Have we gained emotional protection by distancing ourselves from death, or have we lost something essential in the process? As we conclude, consider this. The fear of being forgotten is universal. These families refuse to let memory dissolve. Through chemistry, patience, and courage, they created a final image that bridged silence and remembrance. This has been Western Tales Official. If this exploration challenged your assumptions and expanded your understanding of history, subscribe to Western Tales Official for more deeply researched stories from the frontier and beyond. Join us next time as we uncover another forgotten chapter that still echoes in the present.